title of this talk is Relational Care for Precarious Times. So coming together in the face of separation. And I want to talk about the practice, the meditation practice according to my understanding of the Buddhadharma, and how this timeless wisdom can help us deal with the causes of suffering. Yeah, it was said that the Buddha taught two things: the causes of suffering and how to end suffering. So we took this journey through the Divine Abodes, and I'm going to talk about the 3 marks of existence, which is one of the foundational teachings in Buddhism. And as you know, the meditation practice can be really helpful, and it was lovely to witness you all meditating and knowing that you were meditating, and knowing that there are countless beings meditating across this globe. And why do we meditate? And it's such a loaded term, and of course, like so many things, co-opted by capitalism and all that sort of thing. Originally, and this still applies, that the 4 postures, the 4 formal postures of meditation are standing, walking, sitting, and lying down. So in a way, we can be practicing all the time. And in the classical terms of meditation in Buddhism is about 2 things. Bhavana and jhana are the Pali words, the Buddhist words. So bhavana is like mental development, and then jhana or dhyana is like mental, like calm and a luminous mind. So if there were a goal or a purpose for meditation, those would be them. And so it's this training of the mind, yeah. And it's not about creating any sort of state, but what happens is that when we're calm, we can respond to stress and not react to stress and in habitual ways that cause more suffering. So it's not about feeling calm all the time. It's about building the capacity to be with the things as they are in this moment. So again, meditation, we've been sold that, it's to make more money or to feel good or be thin, all these things, right? But meditation, as I understand it, is about building capacity to be with things as they are. So I'm going to share a slide here, a little diagram that I came up with inspired by Sayadaw Tejaniya. He's a Burmese monk. And the cycle of meditation. And there's parts that I'll be referring to in this next part of this talk. There's nowhere really to start, but where I start is around trusting, not where I start, but where I think it's helpful is trust and confidence. Like to have a trust in the practice, which is why it's so important that we're here together, is to remind each other of this trust, that it's building the capacity to trust things as they are, yeah? And so we put effort in. And effort in Buddhism has a specific connotation around mature or wise effort. It's one of the spokes on the wheel of the Eightfold Path. And from putting effort in, wise effort, so this is the middle way. So I mentioned that in the equanimity phrase, the middle way. So not too much apathy and not too much reactivity. And so not too much straining and trying to be perfect at this meditation, but also not being so lax that we don't put any effort in. Yeah. So effort is needed. And what happens from there is that we create mindfulness. So we create moments of awareness and the capacity to be in the moment just as it is. A definition of mindfulness is paying attention on purpose. Yeah. Here, the mindfulness is not about, we're noting pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Vedana is the Pali, the Buddhist term. And so we're building the capacity, cultivating our ability to be with these mood states, these physical sensations, these thoughts. And from there, we develop a stability of mind. So there becomes this calmness that happens when we're able to see thoughts, feelings, our habit patterns, not as who we are, but as sensations. Yeah, feelings, metaphorically, I think of sensations of the heart, and thoughts are like sensations of the brain, and physical sensations are of the body. And so we start to see that we're more than these things that come and go. And then that's insight and wisdom right there. Because in that understanding, that being with the pain and being with the joy, that a wisdom arises. Another way to describe wisdom is that that we're healing pain. That wisdom only comes from healing pain. And insight, wisdom, enlightenment is another term, that we're being fully awake to the moment. And we realize these wonderful things. This is like the true cause of happiness, is being in the moment and having this insight of that we have only this one precious life, or that we're connected to all the things, the beauty, the joys, and the sorrows, and what a precious gift it is to be alive. So we have these moments of insight and wisdom, and then that leads back to trust and confidence in the practice. And then that keeps us going, and that keeps the cycle of meditation going. Yeah, and I'll try to share this in the chat as well at some point, so you can have that. But it's a pretty simple graph. We practice in this way of not being so attached to an outcome. And I think right now, and where we're at, is that we're having a huge crisis in what we put our trust in. One thing I really appreciate about Buddhist teaching is this term of ahipasiko, is come and see for yourself. And so take what you need, and of course honoring the tradition, but really seeing because Buddhism doesn't own this wisdom. Yeah. But the Buddha, as I understand it, taught that you see for yourself and see what works, And that's that trust and confidence in what you experience, your direct experience. And the effort of this wise effort, and a really important part of this is guarding our senses, the sense doors. And in Buddhism, there's 6 senses, the mind being one of them: sight, sound, smell, and taste. And so that a mature effort, a wise effort, is that we're aware, we're guarding our senses all the time. The mindfulness, really a key component of this, is of impermanence, that no feeling is forever, that you're not really your thoughts. And something deep, that you're more than just the pain of your body. And in the stability of mind, that this coming back again and again to the reality that the happiness is only in the here and now. It's sort of like, oh, I'll be happy once I could go and connect with people more physically, or that this kind of destination addiction. Once I get there, and feeling contented with the moment just as it is, that's a stability that only comes with a stability of mind. And this can be a true definition of happiness. So impermanence is one of these marks of existence. Dukkha is another one. So this dukkha translated as like this general unsatisfactoriness. So when we get to this insight and wisdom of this cycle, is that there's a lapse of dukkha, where we realize that we are more than the unpleasantness of our lives, that doesn't define who we are. And we start to tap into the dukkha, this unpleasantness, this suffering, pain, and not over personalize it. We connect to the reality of the fact that everyone experiences unsatisfactoriness. And, as folks of color, we definitely get extra layers of this in some form or another. Yeah. And when it comes to trust, that we've internalized these messages of not trusting ourselves. I really appreciate that there's been the imposter syndrome term going around, this feeling fraudulent, but this deeper kind of internalization of like that we don't matter, that our accomplishments, what our ancestors went through, how much they survived, that somehow it's less than white-bodiedness. Yeah. And the isms, sexism, racism, those are the fuels of the flames of imposter syndrome. And racism, sexism, all the isms are a really potent form of dukkha in our culture. And the reality is that it's a part of dukkha. It's a part of our existence, you know. And this practice gives us the opportunity. And my experience has been that it's on the daily, that it's a privilege that I have the capacity to practice meditation and to undo these knots of the internalized messages we receive. And then we have all these terms around how we internalize these messages, and they're even confusing. The reason I call this talk relational care versus self-care is because even the term self-care has been co-opted by the wellness industrial complex, or like diet culture is another kind of term that I've been really into. This idea of elevating certain types of bodies and demonizing our food choices, and favoring certain bodies over others. And I love that concept of relational care because I think it gets to the reality of this interconnection, and one way I can create more dukkha, more suffering, is I try to find examples that I'm not such and such thing. But the reality is that we've all internalized this suffering. I know as like a brown man, I'm from El Salvador, like this term like alien makes this point really clear, that it's something once we've heard, and all of us heard these kind of terms when we were really young, that it makes an impression on us. And I have a lot of faith in this practice when we get into this like insight and wisdom parts of the practice, that we see that there is an impermanence to these sensations, to these internalizations, that as we bring wise effort, we can begin to dismantle these things. And that dukkha, again, that everyone suffers it, even the haters, even the people perpetuating the oppression. And we know we're seeing our complicity in it, all of us, and we definitely see this, how much suffering some people are perpetuating and creating. But this leads to the third characteristic around no self, that there's no essential self, and I'll get into that in a moment. Yeah, with impermanence, like what helps me is knowing that like the bad stuff won't last forever, and that things change, and that there's never like a boring moment. That boredom usually arises from a slight aversion to something that we're not wanting to feel. Yeah. But this could lead to like like, well, what the fuck's the point? If everything's going to change, like, why would I even invest any of my time, effort, and this could slip into like a depression, right? Or an anxiety of trying to control everything. And I love, as many of you are aware of, one of our ancestors, Octavia Butler, and she talks about in Parable of the Sower specifically about impermanence in a really beautiful way that's really stuck with me. And she talks, she says, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. So in Buddhism, this is called karma. And karma could be a whole other talk. But I want to dispel like a huge misconception of my understanding of karma as I've learned in yogic and Buddhistic traditions, that it's not this personal, like what goes around comes around and punishes you kind of mentality that we have that's hashtag Christian hegemony and stuff. But like this karma meaning action and ma meaning me is one interpretation. But karma just means action. That we tend to take suffering personal. That I know as a social activist, as for the last 26 years, I've like been like, how many countless hours have I spent in service, and there's still suffering. Like that's one way. Like I kind of take suffering personal, or like, oh, why is this happening to me? I'm a good person. Like. And that's this dukkha again. And coming back to this idea of trust, like that we mistrust our very present moment experiences. This is one way I think we've internalized oppression. And one huge way we mistrust the moment is believing this is a big delusion, and like the biggest cause, in my opinion, of mental health distress. And mental and physical health are not separate, right? But the biggest delusion we have is that we believe that we're the only ones going through what we're going through. And what we do with this unpleasantness, right? When one thing was a habit of mine, and I've checked it a lot, but like when I start talking shit about people, right? It's generally because I can't hold that intensity within myself, that there's a part of me that I'm not able to reconcile, that I'm not able to love. Yeah, and anxiety, right? So much of it. There's this collective anxiety, and we're not separate from it. But anxiety is it kind of this energy, to totally unpathologize, depathologize it. It's just energy, but it's telling us not to look at it, right? And so what we do is we do other things to try to find certainty, right? We go into our feeds and looking for certainty, right? And the trip about the internet is that what you're looking for, you're going to find, right? And this is another deep thing, but in terms of internalized oppression, since we've internalized these messages of not enoughness, of subhuman, of all the things, that we will look for the evidence that that's true as a way to reconcile that dissonance, right? Because we were taught that I'm this, I'm that, I'm not this, I'm not that. So we'll start to look for the evidence, right? And then anxiety in particular has us looking for an answer to what if. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then the talking shit part is that when we can't hold it ourselves, it's an unloved part of ourselves, we start to blame others, right? How common is it for us to say, you're making me feel this way? So when the reality is that no one makes us feel a certain way, right? Feelings are a part of being human and of dukkha, yeah, potentially dukkha. And feelings are an example of impermanence because feelings aren't facts, right? They're real. They're a part of our human experience, and they're so important to acknowledge because we know when we don't acknowledge grief, sadness, it turns into bigger, all-consuming emotions like depression or an anxiety or panic trying to shake us out of it, right? And then when we start to investigate our thoughts, we're not our thoughts either, right? When we experience pain, we're not our physical sensations. We're more than this. They're impermanent. They change. Yeah. Which connects us to this third characteristic, this third mark of existence, this no self. But before we go there, I want one person to, in the chat box, put in one feeling. Just throw in one feeling, and you'll be speaking for all 70 people. No, just kidding. Just one feeling. We're going to moderate it. Um, okay, love. All right. So this is a pleasant feeling, and there's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, yeah, and love. So the way it's written here is lowercase love. So I'm gonna extract some unpleasantness in that. So love. So we practice metta, loving kindness practice. What masquerades as loving kindness, unconditional positive regard, goodwill for all beings, actually. Agape is a Greek word. Lowercase l masquerades as capital L love. It's attached love. Like, I only love you if you do certain things for me. If you only act this way, if you act that way, if you stop doing this, if you do that. So love as a feeling, and we know that it's impermanent, right? That it comes and it goes. Like, it's a fair weather thing. Like, I love the weather only when it's pleasant, even though the rains bring nutrients to the soil and is a part of the cycle of life. So that's the feeling of love. Capital L love is this metta, as I understand it, is this unconditional positive regard, this for all beings. Because as I mentioned earlier, in general, if there's a hating going on, which is an obviously opposite of loving kindness, that's the far enemy, it's called. The near enemy is attached love, lowercase l love. It's an unloved part of ourselves because we're all suffering on some level. And so I would love to go through all the fields, but you get the idea that they come and they go. They're conditional. And if it's connected to a trauma, it's going to throw us into a tizzy, yeah? And this is where these divine abodes, these practices, especially equanimity, can help us create the space so that we can hold these feelings. And we also need others to help us, because so many of our traumas happen in relationship. Yeah. So they're healed in relationship. And to develop, and it's a relationship of ourselves. This is the relational care. Yeah, it's in relation to ourselves, and then so that we know how to ask for what we need and how to receive it, and that mutuality. And we develop trust in ourselves by knowing our own history and finding folks that have earned the right to hear our stories. Because we tend to just expect others to heal us when they're dealing with dukkha as well, yeah? And this is this no self, which is this huge kind of amorphous sort of concept. But I'll just spend like a couple minutes more breaking it down. To me, it requires this letting go of over personalizing and over identifying with our experiences. Again, that we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings, we're not our sensations, we're not even our identities. Yeah. But as folks of color and belonging to several marginalized identities, many of us do, it's really important to hold on to our identities, right? Because this is the paradox. We need our thoughts and feelings and physical sensations to connect to this, to our humanity, to the preciousness of this life. Yeah. And because declaring, our identity as black or brown, indigenous, undocumented, able-bodied, disabled, queer, we're stating that we're human, right? That we're worth living. Yet this concept of no self, at some point, we start to over-identify with these identities. And then we get locked into to reducing ourselves to smaller versions of ourselves. And so you see that, right? That's kind of a product of systemic oppression, is dehumanizing us. So, and this is a paradox, is it's so important to acknowledge ourselves, right? Especially the parts we don't love, right? Because the parts we don't love, again, we're going to other people. And then we start to make our identities in contrast of the other, of the quote unquote other. And this comes out in a really practical way, because how much time do we spend like calling people out, talking shit about the, quote unquote the other side, right? And then we're not creating a space to see how we're comparing ourselves. And I'm not talking complete smack on the social media, but that, because there's a meme that comes to mind right now, this sort of like notice the practice, this meditation practice is inviting us to notice when we're comparing the outsides, right, to our insides, right? When the reality is that we have to acknowledge that in ourselves, because looking outside of ourselves for that is there's no essential self. There's suffering. It's going to change. You know? And so that's a big cause of suffering, is looking for permanence and things that are impermanent. Just want to share a little statue here that a friend from my queer men of color deep refuge group gave me. And since for those of you that have been to EBMC, or many of you have seen the statues of the Buddha, this manifestation representation of the Buddha having one hand placed on the ground. Yeah. So to reminding us that we belong, that all our identities belong, that we're more than our identities, and especially more than the delusions that there aren't other people suffering, that we don't have Buddha nature, that we don't have the capacity to awaken, that our lives matter, right? And so the Buddha was said to have said, as the earth as my witness, I'm placing my hand, and that I belong. And this connection to nature as a way of reflecting. So nature needs us to reflect on its own beauty. Yeah. So it's not about self-importance or replicating this hyper-individualism that we're in. It's about remembering, like re-sewing ourselves, yeah, that we're an inextricable part of nature. So we are nature's way of reflecting on its own beauty. We are nature's way of reflecting on its own beauty. And that we as humans are not the virus, right? We're not the virus. If anything, the virus is greed, hatred, delusion. And the Divine Abode practices are a reminder of our our beauty, of our divinity, that we each have unique gifts to offer this world. And one of my teachers, Rita Shimon, she says that our purpose is to give away these gifts, to receive the gifts, to receive the reflections of our humanity. In the title, I haven't touched on this word of precarious, yeah. And so we know precarious is like, oh shit, it's like something's not securely held in place. It's dangerous. It's likely to fall apart. But the etymology, the prefix of precarious, it means prayer. So it's an earnest and humble request of prayer. So as we face this current form of separation, I pray that we trust the reality that we are not separate. And being here together is a prayer answered. Yeah. So thank you for coming together to practice and relational care in these times.